Welcome into Rig Recon University, and our presentation this month is on apparatus door decisions. So this specifically is brought to you by ROM Corporation, where we manufacture roll-up doors, and today we're going to dive into the subject of basically roll-up doors versus hinge doors. Wanted to start by mentioning our core values here at Clariance, and that is our clear statement, the fact that we have curiosity, leadership, enthusiasm, accountability, and respect. This is how we base our daily activities and decisions we make as a corporation and what gives us pride in this industry. This webinar is hosted on Rig Recon. Rig Recon is our site that is everything fire apparatus, whether it's products that we build or products that go on a fire truck that we don't build. It's an education site designed to educate you on how a fire apparatus goes together and help you when you're trying to make decisions on things you want to purchase. Encourage you, if you're not, to join in and listen to Rig Recon Live. We are now in season 3 of our podcast. We have 4 excellent episodes this year that have been released so far. The Art of the War Wagon with Kyle Romagus, Tanker Operations with Henry Lovett, Asking the Question Why with Bruce Griffin, and The Flow Factor with Jerry Herbst. Today, we're specifically going to focus on doors. Not necessarily the most exciting subject for most people, but it's something very important on your fire truck. It's something that you use on every call that you go on, and it's something that provides safety for not only your firefighters, but people on the street so that things don't come flying off your apparatus. We're going to dive in, talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages. We're going to talk about hinge versus roll up. We're going to try and dispel some of the myths that are out there on the industry by talking about facts. And then we're going to dive into the specific construction of the ROM door. So let's talk about just products in general and why you might want roll-up doors versus hinged. The first is access to your equipment. So as you see in the photo here, if I've got a roll-up door, I give a very clean access point to something like a rollout tray. So now if I have to lift this heavy generator off the shelf, I can have people access it from all sides. When I have a hinge door, I've obstructed that access. The hinge door inherently on both sides is blocking that tray. So now I can only access it from the front, which means for the most part, only one firefighter can get in there and get at that piece of equipment. The other advantage to a roll-up doors is we eliminate obstructions. So with this hinge door in this picture, I've got a telephone pole here. If I'm getting something out of this compartment, I now need to go back around this pole because I'm blocked. The other thing is if this operator parked this truck in the right spot, so you could open this lift up door. If the operator didn't stay far enough away from that pole, this compartment would be completely inaccessible because I wouldn't be able to raise the door. Sight lines are also critical. With hinge doors, in this example, I can't see the back of the rig. So the pump operator here in the circle is hidden from potentially oncoming traffic. He also can't see some of these lines that are deployed and operating. With the roll-up door, you just have a clearer area to be able to see things. Everyone hates the beep, beep, beep of a door being open. There's so many false alarms in the industry that people tend to ignore them. If I ignore that my door is open and I have a hinge door, it can cause serious damage going out of that apparatus bay. In the example here, you see it basically destroyed part of the firehouse. We've seen photos where the entire roof came down because they took out center beams. With a roll-up door, I wouldn't have this issue. Still have a problem with my door being open because equipment could fly out, but at least I'm not going to have a catastrophic failure of my building. One of the myths in the industry is that, well, when I do roll-up doors, I lose compartment space. That's not true, and we're going to try and dive in here and explain why this is a myth and not a fact. So our case study is we're going to take just a common compartment, 64 inches tall, 46 inches wide by 24 inches deep. When this is a cross section of the compartment, so you can see here 24 deep, 64 tall. With a hinge door, I typically have a 3-inch header at the top. So I end up with a 61-inch door opening. Now we're going to talk about door opening in the next slide. You definitely have more door opening with a hinge door than a roll-up. That's a fact. With our hinge door, it's typically a 2-inch thick door pan. So when I do the cubic footage calculation, if I take 24 by 64 by 46 wide, I have 46 cubic feet of storage space. That's what's in this box. I have to take off some losses. We're going to take the header off as a loss for both hinged and roll up. We're going to put it back in then as hidden storage. But initially we're going to say our 3-inch header by 24 inches deep by 46 inches wide loses 1.92 cubic feet of space. Our door pan is 2 inches thick. That intrudes 2 inches into the compartment. So if I had a slide out tray, I have to make that tray 22 inches deep instead of 24. So that's 2 inches thick by the full height of the door, 61 inches, by the full width of the compartment, 46. That's 3.25 cubic feet. If I take those two numbers off of 46, I end up with a 40.83 cubic foot compartment. I do have some hidden space up here, this 1.92 cubic feet up behind the header. I can access that. It's hard to get to, but it is there. Now let's do the same thing with a roll-up door. With a roll-up door, the header is much larger, so I am going to lose some for that. If I do the same math, my 24 by 64 by 46, I'm still at 46 cubic feet. I'm going to take the entire header off. So the header and the lift bar is 9 inches approximately. So that's 24 inches deep by 9 inches tall by 46 inches across. That's 5.75 cubic feet. Do the math. Do I have less storage space with a roll-up door? Sure, a little bit. I mean, we're talking 40.25 versus 40.83. Not that big of a deal. Technically, I do have more hidden storage space behind the roll of this roll-up door. 2.875 versus 1.92. All in all, they store about the same amount of equipment. Talked about compartment height. Compartment height is definitely reduced. That's not something we can get away from. But let's talk about how you access the equipment in compartment and if that really matters. So the average distance from the ground to a compartment floor is 26 inches. The average firefighter height is 5'11". That means the distance from the ground to this space that I lost because of the roll-up door is 7 feet away. Most people can't reach what would be stored in here. So the fact is the roll-up door definitely reduced the compartment height. It's a 55-inch opening versus 61 on the hinged. Where this would really matter is if I had a vertical pull-out toolboard. That vertical toolboard now could only be 55 inches tall versus 61 inches tall in the other compartment. But the facts are, does it really matter? Can I access and use this space? Most times when you see roll-up doors, you'll see this space gets used by a hidden tunnel that's accessed from the rear step on the body of the truck. Put things like a ladder down through there. Suction hose storage is very common in that area. So we find better ways to use that space. One thing with ROM, as we dive into the ROM door and what makes it different, is history. And it's history that you can count on. It's one thing to say, oh, we've been in the industry for 40 plus years making these doors. We've been in the industry longer making doors, but in the emergency services on fire trucks, it's been about 40 years. There's well over 500,000 doors in service in some of the hardest run fire departments in the country. That's history that you can count on. What makes ROM different is our door construction. First thing we're going to talk about is our lift bar. So our lift bar is the strongest in the industry with a D-shaped design. This came out with our Series 4 door. Our Series 3 door had a round bar, and we quite often had complaints where that bar would bend. Listen to the field, listen to your customers. When they've got a problem, you've got to solve that problem. We solve that problem by coming out with a D-shaped design. There's a groove finish in that D bar, which makes it easier to lift and grab. And then your finger pull, that's the rail that sits above your lift bar. We go full width with that with a groove finish, which gives you a good surface to pull that door down. Raising and lowering doors is assisted with a 4-inch operator with a tension spring. That makes it easier to put the door up and down. That door has to roll up and roll into a compartment. Our idler wheel is made out of rubber. That's done to reduce noise or potential damage to the inside of the door when you raise and lower that door. Talked earlier about door jar switches. There's been a lot of developments over the years in door jar switches. We switched our design to a sealed switch design. So that's an epoxy sealed switch that prevents water intrusion and shorting out of the switch. And then our magnet. The magnet sits in the lift bar. Traditionally, that magnet could walk down the lift bar. If the magnet walks down the lift bar and gets out of adjustment, then it's not striking the switch when you lower and latch the door. With the Series 4 door, we molded that magnet into the end cap. So you can see here, that magnet's built into this end cap, and there's no way for that to walk down the rail now. The other thing we do is we glue this in place so that it can't pop out accidentally. When it comes to door construction, the weight can indeed matter. Most people think, well, if I have a thicker slat, I have a heavier door, it's more durable. That's not necessarily the truth. And we're going to dive into that subject because this is really what sets us apart from our competition. The ROM door weighs approximately 63% less than our leading competitor. If I'm building something like a mini pumper with 4 doors, maybe 5 doors, probably not the end of the world. But when I'm building something like a heavy rescue with large doors, talking 8, 10 doors on a truck, think of a tractor drawn aerial where there can be upwards of 14 doors, 63% weight makes a difference. It makes a huge difference in the overall weight of the rig, and it makes it easier for installation and service when you're trying to lift that door. What it comes down to is strength. And again, most people think bigger is better, thicker is better, heavier is better. Not necessarily. There is give and take to everything we do in this industry. When we talk about strength, we're considering the durability of the door, the protection for the personnel and pedestrians that something doesn't come flying off your rig, and then the lifespan. How long is that door going to last? We're going to dive into this and talk about the slat thickness because this is really what changes and makes it different. How thick that slat is a key engineering thing. Again, bigger isn't always better. Now, if you go out in the industry, one of the things that people will often do as salesmen is exactly what you see in this video. Push on the door and see if it flexes. And what a lot of our competitors will do is they'll push on the door and say, hey, look, see how this one flexes? Push on ours. It doesn't flex. That means we're stronger. Not necessarily. That flex is done by design. That is engineered. That flex increases the door's lifespan. Think about your body when your truck's driving down the road. You hit a pothole, you go through a sharp turn. The body flexes, the body moves. Think about an aerial device when you put it up on jacks. When you put them outriggers down, you put a twist in that body. You need your door to be able to flex to have give and take for this type of environment and the things that we do to our apparatus. So this flex you see, that's not a bad thing. So what a cynic would say is, well, if it flexes like that, it's going to break. No. And we've done the testing to prove that. So while we're thick enough to be strong and prevent issues, we're also thin enough to be nimble and to keep it lasting in the industry. The first way we test that is a sled test. The sled test is a 25-pound weight accelerated to 15 miles per hour, which equals 15 to 20 Gs of force. Now, this is a pretty small door that you're seeing in this test, and this was done specifically for an EMS application to prove that equipment inside the compartment in the box wouldn't come through the door and injure the patient or the EMT in the back of that ambulance. With that sled test and a 15 to 20 G of force applied to it, on the left photo, you can see the sled. In the center photo, you see the compartment. And then this is the door after it was struck with the sled. You can see there's no damage to the door. So 15 to 20 G's of force striking this door did not cause damage. And that's one thing you can say that's a lab, you're testing a controlled environment. Here's a real world incident that occurred. 4,500 PSI SCBA cylinder, commonly carried in an apparatus, a lot of times in a rack where you have a bunch of cylinders. Something happened with this rig where a piece of equipment fell and struck the valve and sheared it off. That basically creates a missile. So that cylinder launched inside the compartment, smashed off the back of the compartment door, bounced back into the tray where I've still got pressure and air expelling from that cylinder, launched back in the door again. So if you can imagine it, it rattled back and forth inside the compartment, striking the door multiple times. These are pictures of the actual truck. Here you can see the damage done to the door. Here's the inside of the door. This missile, for lack of a better term, slammed off this door, but stayed inside. So did that flex that I showed you a few slides ago really matter? The door is strong enough to contain an SCBA cylinder launching inside. It's strong enough to contain a tray that's not latched properly, sliding out and striking the inside of the door. The final part is durability. So we concern ourselves with how durable is the door and is it going to last? The durability test is a 100,000 cycle test of raising and lowering the door. That's the equivalency of opening and closing a door 5 times a day for 55 years, well beyond the life of most fire apparatus. If I had a thicker slat that was heavier, I may not pass this test. That constant up and down is going to cause that door to eventually fall apart because it's heavier and it's not as rigid, or it's too rigid. It's not as flexible as the ROM door. The final piece of this puzzle is standing behind your product. So we've shown you real world testing. We've talked to you about the engineering that goes behind it. We've shown you our cycle testing, and then we stand behind it with an industry leading 7-year warranty. It doesn't always come down to, in our industry, the best product. Sometimes it comes down to the best support. And that's another place that ROM stands head and shoulders above our competition. We have a full library of repair, replacement, and adjustment videos, as well as maintenance videos online at youtube.com/@ROMcorp. Each of these videos shows you things like how to adjust the tension, how to replace a damaged slat, how to properly clean the door, how to replace an operator. Anything that you would need to do to that door is shown to you in video form and always available. Thank you for watching our webinar. Hopefully you learned a little bit about the difference between hinged and roll-up doors and what makes ROM different in the industry. If you want more information, you can scan the QR code or you can reach out to us through the Contact Us link on our website.